Against the darkness of the Eithilgard void, the wayfinder looked like a splinter held up to a furnace. Captain Elias Thorne gripped the edge of his command console as 300 Korath warships ignited their primary beams. A wall of incandescent gold meant to erase the colony behind him. He didn't blink. He just gave the order to vent the heat sinks. Have you ever wondered what it looks like when a mouse decides to stop running and starts biting back? I'm going to show you exactly how the hegemony's greatest mistake began. Join us for this record of the day the galaxy changed. 5 weeks earlier, the hardest decision Elias had faced was whether to harvest the lunar wheat before or after the midsummer rains. The obsidian spear hung over the mining zone like a jagged obsidian needle. From the command dais, Overlord Bond watched the tiny blip on his tactical display. It was a mapping vessel, a primitive thing called the wayfinder, loitering where it didn't belong. Bond's fingers drummed against his armrest, the metal clinking rhythmically. Boredom was the true rot of the hegemony. To cure it, he signaled 40 destroyers to break formation. It was an absurd overallocation of force, like using a siege engine to crush a single grape. But Vaughn wanted a spectacle. He watched as his fleet swarmed the tiny scout, expecting the human captain to beg for mercy or die in a silent flash of light. Instead, a voice crackled through the dreadnought's bridge, calm and terrifyingly steady. Captain Thorne refused to surrender, citing a peaceful mission. Vaughn actually laughed. The sound was dry, like sandpaper on stone. Then the wayfinder moved. It didn't fly like a ship. It moved like a predator. The humans weren't using energy pulses. They were firing solid slugs of tungsten at a significant fraction of light speed. The Korath shields, designed to disperse plasma and lasers, buckled under the raw kinetic impact. A destroyer's bridge vanished in a spray of silver sparks. Then another. The wayfinder danced between the massive, lumbering warships, its flight patterns unpredictable and jagged. By the time the hegemony fleet managed to pivot their heavy batteries, 13 of their ships were drifting hulks of scorched metal. The wayfinder didn't stay to finish the fight. It punched a hole through the remaining line and vanished into warp, trailing a thin ribbon of blue ion exhaust. Bond stood up, his boredom replaced by a cold, prickling sensation he hadn't felt in centuries. It wasn't just anger. It was the realization that the primitives weren't playing by the rules of the hegemony's rigid military doctrine. Which meant the readings were wrong. On Eithilgard, the news of the skirmish didn't bring celebration. It brought the sound of oiling metal. In the farmsteads, families didn't pack bags. They reached into floor joists. Elias Thorne's brother, a man who had spent 40 years tending soil, pulled a heavy, bolt-action hunting rifle from a velvet-lined case. It was a relic, heavy and scarred, but its action was smooth as silk. But why would a farmer bring a primitive projectile to a starship fight? It seems like madness until you realize that a bullet doesn't care about a shield frequency. Bond watched from the obsidian spear as the Eithilgard atmosphere began to boil under the heat of 300 ships. The planet was a pebble. The fleet was an avalanche. He expected the humans to break, but the scanners showed a chaotic, decentralized movement on the surface. Not an army, but a swarm. Thousands of small, erratic signatures emerged from the farmsteads. They didn't have capital ships. They had modified tractors and atmospheric haulers. And they had their rifles. Vaughn leaned closer to the view screen. A hegemony shock trooper, encased in armor that could withstand a volcanic eruption, was suddenly snapped backward. A heavy, metal projectile had punched through his neck joint. Then another. The farmers were using the terrain, firing from irrigation ditches and silos, turning the rigid Korath formations into a shooting gallery. It was primitive, it was messy, and it was working. Just as Vaughn prepared to signal the orbital bombardment, the final scorched earth solution, the void behind his fleet tore open. He didn't see a massive armada. He saw a handful of Terran ships, sleek and deceptively small, led by a carrier named the Vindication. Admiral Helena Vance didn't engage his dreadnoughts directly. She didn't need to. Her fighters ignored the capital ships, diving instead for the communication relays and the fuel tenders. The Korath command structure, a perfect, rigid pyramid, began to crumble from the bottom up. Without orders from the top, the captains froze. Without fuel, the destroyers drifted. Vaughn watched his unstoppable invasion force become a collection of expensive targets. The Wayfinder rose from the surface of Aethelgard, a broken scout ship positioning itself as a lone shield against the orbital fire of 300 warships. It was a suicidal gesture, a bluff. But Vaughn hesitated. He saw the way the human ships moved with a frantic creative energy that his own soldiers lacked. He saw the Vindication moving into a broadside position, its kinetic batteries glowing with the heat of a dozen suns. The fire never came. Vaughn signaled the retreat. Days later, in the Korath throne room, Vaughn stood behind his emperor as a human woman in a simple suit walked toward them. Ambassador Mara Sterling didn't bow. She simply laid a digital map on the table. It showed the hegemony borders, and then it zoomed out, and out, and out. The hegemony was a small stain on the edge of a vast, Terran-patrolled sector. Sterling spoke softly, her voice carrying the weight of a mountain. She explained that Vaughn hadn't fought the Terran military. He had fought a mapping crew and some angry farmers. He had faced 0.03% of their strength. Vaughn looked at his emperor. For the first time in 10,000 years, he saw the ancient alien's hands tremble. On the surface of Aethelgard, the smoke was finally clearing. Elias Thorne sat on the porch of his farmhouse, his back aching from a week of holding a firing line. He looked down at the heavy bolt-action hunting rifle resting across his knees. The wood was scorched, and the barrel was still warm from the last stand. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had protected his soil. He looked out at the sunset, watching the light catch on the wreckage of a hegemony dropship in his north field. It was just a heap of scrap metal now, slowly sinking into the mud. What happens when an empire realizes they aren't the predators anymore? It makes you wonder if the galaxy is smaller than we thought, or if humans are just much, much bigger. We'll be here tomorrow to chronicle the next discovery.